Everyone says coastal Delaware is paradise. We've got low taxes, ocean views, and it's perfect for retirement. But what if I told you that some of those picture-perfect towns are hiding some pretty big surprises? You know, things like sudden insurance rate hikes or HOA fees that could cost you thousands of dollars in the end. Now, there's many other real estate agents out there that aren't gonna tell you what I'm about to share, but you need to know this stuff before buying. These are certainly things that I would wanna know if I was moving to an area. And the dream lifestyle that you've heard so much about, it might come with a little bit of a higher price tag than you originally thought. So let's uncover the truth they leave out of all of our tourism brochures and give you the real nitty-gritty details. So let's start with something that is actually pretty serious, and that's flooding and rising sea levels. Now, this isn't a problem that's, in the distant future for generations away. It's things that are happening now in our own neighborhoods. Our area is super vulnerable to flooding, especially in those low-lying areas. We've got many areas, that are only a few feet above sea level. We are sandwiched between the Atlantic Ocean and the Delaware Bay, and storms keep getting worse year after year, it seems. Now, the reality check is that according to the NOAA and Climate Central, we're probably going to be seeing some record-breaking coastal floods within the next 20 years. Now, they're projecting about 1.2 to 1.3 feet of sea level rise by the mid-century, and maybe up to 4.4 feet by 2100. Now, what we currently call extreme floods could become yearly events within just 50 years, and that's pretty nuts to think about. And what's really concerning is that there's over 20,000 homes worth about $1.1 billion that sit on land that is less than 5 feet above the sea level, and many of these properties are in areas where people would struggle the most to bounce back financially after a total big flood. Now, I'm not saying any of this to freak you out, but you need to protect yourself and your investment. And if you're thinking about buying here, you absolutely must check out resources like the Coastal Flood Monitoring System and DenRec's Flood Planning Tool. Now, these tools show you real-time data and future flood risks for those specific addresses, so you can type a property address in and it'll pull it up. And something wild is that the flood risk can be totally different just a few blocks apart, even within the same community. Things that are slightly higher or slightly more inland, they may have a completely different flood risk level, and they could be just a few homes apart. Speaking of some inland communities, I'll show you later how places like Millsboro and Ocean View can give you that coastal lifestyle, though it's important to note that some of these areas do still face some significant flood risk, so always check the specific flood data for any property. However, you can find some homes here for much lower cost than you would find in Rehoboth or Bethany or even Lewes. One other important thing that we need to talk about is homeowners insurance, because it ties directly into some flooding issues. But before we move on, I've got a quick ask for you guys. You could take a second to subscribe to the channel. Each week, we break down the latest data, real estate market trends, and insights that actually matter if you're serious about coastal Delaware real estate. Our subscribers get a clear edge in the market, so hit that button and get the information that you need to know each and every week to make the smart moves for you. Okay, the truth is that standard homeowners insurance policies usually don't cover the coastal flood risks and flooding and things that our area experiences. You're looking at much higher premiums and sometimes limited options. Homeowners in coastal Delaware generally pay more for insurance than the national average, mostly because insurance companies view our area as slightly more risky. Now, you might need a specialized policy depending on where you are buying and the associated risk level with that area. While a lot of our area does not require flood insurance, many of our buyers actually opt to get it just as a peace of mind thing, knowing that if the worst of the worst happens, they are still covered on all fronts. But what makes this so different from inland areas is that your deductibles along the coastal region are typically higher, and the coverage is typically a lot more restrictive, especially for things like wind and flood damage. They may require specific riders. Now, if your home is in a designated flood zone on the FEMA maps, things like flood insurance may not be a choice. They may be mandatory, especially if you're getting a mortgage. Your lender will definitely demand that you get flood insurance for any of those high-risk properties or areas deemed to be in a flood zone. Again, I don't want to sound all doom and gloom, though. There are definitely ways to manage some of these costs. You can look at properties in lower risk areas, or you can make certain home improvements that might help lower your premiums, again, depending on the risk level associated. The next thing that we want to talk about is those land lease communities where your insurance costs are just the beginning of the ongoing expenses that you need to factor in. And this one's the real head scratcher. If you've never heard of it before, land lease communities are things where in some of the communities you might own the house, but you don't actually own the land that's underneath of it. It's pretty wild, right? Now, this setup is called a land lease, as I mentioned, and the purchase price often looks way more affordable at first compared to some similar properties where you own both the home and the land, which can seem super attractive when you're just looking at the purchase price. But here's the deal. While you might pay less upfront on paper, paper, you're gonna be shelling out significant monthly fees forever for leasing that land, and your property typically will not see as much appreciation as those homes that are owned in fee simple ownership. The lease terms and potential increases are super important to check out before buying. Some land leases come with all kinds of restrictions on what you can do with your property, yearly fee hikes that can grow faster with inflation, and basically zero control over future costs. These setups can also make selling or refinancing a real headache down the road because many lenders look at them more like cars than they do homes. And some communities near Rehoboth may look affordable at first glance, but when you look closer, it could be a land lease adding over $1,300 a month to housing costs, and it may have built-in increases over a 99-year term. When you run the numbers, that can seriously impact long-term financial plans, especially for anyone thinking about retirement. And that's why so many buyers end up choosing communities where they own the land outright or that fee simple ownership that we mentioned before. So always ask if a property is part of a land lease community. And if it is, you need to make sure that you understand every single detail before moving forward. Again, your agent should be able to bring this up proactively and help you out and help you understand those scenarios, but not every community is built the same. Now, the situation gets even more complicated when you consider the flood risk that we just talked about. Imagine paying rising land lease fees for property that's becoming increasingly more vulnerable to things like flooding. Certainly, it wouldn't be a position that I want to be in. Now, we'll explore some better alternatives when we get to the housing affordability section in a bit, but first, let's talk about the HOAs and community fees. They're closely connected and can have big impacts on your monthly costs. Here's the thing, a ton of communities in our area, especially those newer developments and places close to the beach, have mandatory HOA fees that you're going to need to budget in. These fees typically cover things like your pools, your fitness center, your lawn maintenance, your common area maintenance, and any savings for any reserves for future repairs down the road to roadways and that kind of stuff. But what a lot of agents won't mention is that these fees can often spike, sometimes by a lot, depending on how the community's finances and management are doing, which is super important in our coastal area because Delaware law actually gives buyers the ability to review all HOA documents and budgets before closing under the Delaware Uniform Common Interest Ownership Act, often called the Kiowa. And what that means is that after going under contract, a seller has a certain time period to furnish the documents to the buyer, and then the buyer gets a 5-day review period of those documents. And it's super important that you need to look through these documents carefully to make sure you're not buying into a financially shaky community with ballooning fees or maintenance that they've put off for years. Now, another thing about HOAs that really does matter in some of our communities is how they handle flood prevention infrastructure. Well-run HOAs in flood-prone areas often take some proactive steps like upgrading their stormwater management systems and planning for community-wide resilience. These efforts can make a huge difference in protecting your property value over time, especially in those high-risk zones. So let's move on and talk about something that impacts daily life here in many ways that buyers don't fully get until they actually live here, our seasonal population swings. Now, the seasonal population surge is especially true in our popular areas like Rehoboth, Lewes, Bethany, and Fenwick Island. It's right after July 4th that I'm filming this, so we just came through the July 4th traffic. Those peaceful, quiet neighborhoods that you tour in February can completely transform in July. Things like traffic and noise levels jump through the roof, especially near some of our major roadways or in our more popular beach towns. So what feels like a Zen retreat during your winter home shopping trip might feel completely different when tourist season hits full swing and we get into times like July 4th weekend. And let me tell you, it's a smart move to visit these potential areas during both the off-season and peak season before making a decision because the difference can be quite dramatic. What feels quiet and charming in the spring might become crowded and hectic in the summertime with traffic and noise levels that could change how you feel about the location and where you've purchased. Those population swings and population surges also strain local services like crazy. During peak season, you're gonna wait longer at restaurants, it's gonna take you longer to get to the grocery store, and generally, you're just gonna compete more for those basic services. Emergency services and healthcare can get stretched thin during those busy periods too, just because there are way more people here during the 3 months of summertime. But on the flip side, during the off season, some businesses and services do also cut back hours or close completely, and this affects year-round residents who might find fewer options for dining and entertainment or specialized services from October through April when the area is a little bit more slow. Now that said, lots of residents actually love this seasonal rhythm. They enjoy the energy of summer and then they get to reclaim their favorite spots without the crowding during the quieter months. And it's really about matching your lifestyle preferences to the right location in our coastal region. If you go on any of our local Facebook groups right now, everyone's complaining about the traffic. Some communities, especially those built further inland, don't experience a lot of those seasonal swings in population while still giving you easy access to the beaches. prices, and this can be the perfect balance for folks who want that coastal living without dealing with the full-on tourist invasion that we happen to get in the summertime. All right, now let's talk about housing affordability and availability, a growing concern in our beach communities. The demand for homes in places like Lewes, Rehoboth, Bethany Beach, Fenwick Island has been absolutely exploding, and it's mostly driven by out-of-state buyers and people who can now work remotely from anywhere. They're no longer tied to an office, and this trend has pushed prices up, and it's created a serious inventory shortage, especially for those middle and lower income residents. The median home price in some of our beach communities has jumped well over 30% in just the last 3 years. That's not pocket change. Those are real differences that people are feeling right at home. And what makes this tricky is that while Delaware's coastal towns are generally more affordable than similar beach spots in Maryland and New Jersey, those prime beach properties can still cost you a pretty good penny. In Rehoboth, for example, properties that are within walking distance to the beach or to the boardwalk typically start around $2 million, and that puts them well out of reach for many buyers in the area. But here's where knowing the local scene really helps. There are definitely still opportunities for more affordable coastal living if you know where to look. Inland communities like Millsboro, Long Neck, or Ocean View give you way better value while still keeping you close enough to the beaches and coastal amenities that you're just a short drive away. Now, one strategy that has worked great for our clients is looking for those up and coming areas that will likely appreciate as coastal development continues pushing inland. This helps you get in at a lower price point now while still benefiting from that future growth for years. Now, it's worth noting that different coastal towns have completely different vibes and market patterns. Again, Lewes tends to attract more year-round residents and has some diverse housing options, while Rehoboth and Bethany have more vacation homes and luxury properties. So understanding these differences can help you focus your search where it makes sense for you and your lifestyle and what you're searching for. All right, so let's wrap up what we've covered about the realities of living in coastal Delaware that most other people just don't talk about. First, flooding and sea level rise aren't future problems that we have to worry about hundreds of years from now. They're already impacting safety and property values, and using tools like DENREC's flood planning tool to research your flood zone impacts is certainly a benefit. Second, insurance here can cost more, it can be harder to get, and it may require multiple policies, so I would get quotes early to avoid any big surprises on the back end. Third, those land lease and HOA arrangements can mean major long-term costs, and always read the fine print and know what you're really paying for and what you're buying into. You don't want to buy into a financially failed community. Fourth, infrastructure services and costs of living vary widely between beach towns, inland towns, even beach town to beach town, and those seasonal population swings can change a community's feel dramatically between summer and spring or summer and winter. And finally, while there are challenges, there are also big opportunities. With the right info and right mindset, coastal Delaware offers a quality of life that's hard to match. We've got great beaches, strong communities, and those tax advantages that everyone loves. So if you're thinking about making a move to coastal Delaware, my team and I focus on matching buyers with coastal communities that fit their lifestyle, budget, and long-term goals. All of our contact information is gonna be down below in the description, and we absolutely love hearing from you guys right here on the channel, and we love helping you guys find your dream home here in coastal Delaware. Now, if this video helped, check out the real pros and cons of living in coastal Delaware that we have on our channel. It dives into all of the great things that our area has to offer and balances it out with today's realities. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you guys on the next one.